payment instruments to talk to each other, but also more importantly, across different forms of money. CBDC on the one hand, and depending on how things work out, there could also be different types of stable coins which might be in coexistence, along with, of course, the current existing structure of commercial bank money-based payment instruments. The third point is the modernization pace of the domestic payments ecosystem is much faster than what you're seeing for cross-border. And increasingly, now it's come to a point where there's increasing light being shown on the deficiencies of the cross-border payments. And the G20 initiatives in this regard is, of course, clearly illustrative and emblematic of that. And I think this will create new pressure now to see how we can organize the mechanics of cross-border payment flows, and the role which CBDC can play in that is going to become important. One aspect related to payment flows, in particular on cross-border, but also for domestic payments, is this whole notion of financial integrity and this whole ability to ensure that when needed, you know the identity of the sender and recipient, and they are vetted against all the different kind of sanctions screening and so on. I think this will put pressure on requiring some kind of convergence and combining of ID verification and the payment flows. And this could take various forms. It could take like prior validations. It could take like transactions being signed. So irrefutably linking the sender and recipients to a particular transaction and so on. It could take various forms. There are various technological avenues and channels there. And then lastly, I think we should not forget that the pace of adoption of digital will vary across countries and also within countries. And it will hence be important to ensure that those with a longer transition period to digital are supported. And in some sense, the existing payment instruments might need to continue, cash might need to continue for some time to ensure that there's a sufficient kind of a runway for migration of kind of every segment of the society to digital and other forms of money, other forms of making payments. So coming to the specific point related to inclusion, I think everybody, of course, will agree, but perhaps nobody clearly explicitly stated that, and I will go ahead and do that. I think CBDC by itself does not guarantee access and does not necessarily directly contribute to financial inclusion. I think it is more about CBDC as a program, kind of led by the public authorities, will certainly bring attention to some long-standing issues responsible for lower access and usage. And one can broadly classify them into the high cost to serve certain customer segments, high cost to access and use, and then lack of compelling use cases. So the underlying issues will need to be addressed as part of any successful CBDC rollout. And this would take the form of general ecosystem development in addition to specific CBDC features. And specific ecosystem features, I would broadly put them into three categories. Firstly is the entry of new players and new business and distribution models. And here I'm referring to entry of non-bank players, and then also agent-based services and other such models which might be, which are essential. Then simplified and tiered customer due diligence requirements. Whenever you want to have an account-based service, I think this becomes important, and a lack of that can become a barrier in itself. And then there's a strong pull and push factor which is required, and this could come from a compelling need like person-to-person transfers in a large country where there's a lot of rural to urban migration or vice versa, and then across countries, or it could be because of strong government programs which need to reach the large number of recipients in good time. So there needs to be a compelling use case for individuals to switch to digital. And without that being there, with all this technical sophistication of CBDC, you will not achieve the financial inclusion impacts. So with those ecosystem features being there, I think a couple of key features of CBDC become then critical to foster and sustain interoperability, and sustain kind of inclusion. And one of the key elements is interoperability. I already talked about that, so I will not repeat it. And then second is it should lend itself into various form factors and instruments which individuals and businesses are already comfortable with. And in some contexts, it might mean that you might need to kind of structure a CBDC in a way that it can be accessed through feature phones It could be accessed through other such digital tools which are available to the general population. A high degree of reliability would be absolutely critical, and I think various kind of examples were given by the co-panelists. And then I think lastly, data protection and privacy will become very, very critical. And in particular, I think data protection and privacy here does not necessarily mean full anonymity. It is more about being comfortable that without due process, the transaction data is not abused. No? I think that is a key point. And CBDC and various other technologies gives various ways in which these can be addressed. So with this, let me stop here. I'll be happy to answer other questions as we progress in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Harish, for your insightful remarks. So I would like to stay with you. I think it is quite clear that CBDC is not a Swiss knife for solving financial inclusion problems, but you have these 360-degree views of how payment systems across the world are evolving. So I would like to ask you, what other tools do central banks have to tackle financial inclusion problems?
No, I think to some extent, I already alluded to this as part of my previous interventions. I think the key point here is that the central banks will need to bring to bear various players who can contribute to this exercise. And in this regard, I think allowing entry of various new entrants, new business models could become relevant. And in different country contexts, different entities can play such roles. It could be the telecom providers, it could be e-commerce platforms in some countries, it could be other ride-hailing platforms and so on. The context, depending on the country context, the players could be different. And then I alluded to the point about simplified customer due diligence. And this is, of course, can be done by, from a regulatory perspective, by clarifying what kind of documents are needed to open an account. In some countries, even attestation by a village elder is sometimes accepted as identification and then as adequate for completing customer due diligence requirement. But of course, with the entry of digital ID, this actually makes this process much easier and allows the regulators to be more comfortable and more confident in allowing remote account opening at agent locations done through online channels and so on. So I think digital ID can be seen as another enabler. But I would hasten to add that in addition to digital ID, of course, one needs to simplify the customer due diligence requirement, make it risk-based and proportional and so on. And even in the context of lack of digital ID, there could be ways in which one could do it, but digital ID makes it much more easier and more elegant to address that point. And then the third aspect I would like to highlight is the entry of things like kind of the fast payment systems as a concept. Many countries are implementing it now. Based on the last count, I think I saw in the BIS as well as our own monitoring, I think it's upwards of 70 countries have adopted it, and it's clearly following a very exponential growth pattern. And I think these systems, if designed well, can be a key enabler also for CBDC, but also more importantly, for enabling new use cases for digital payments by bringing in things like QR code-based services, alias-based payments, and then also new interfaces through APIs and other such novel ways. One can really integrate digital payments into a variety of economic and social interactions. So those are some of the things which I would like to highlight, Kautup.
Thank you so much. So CBDCs and fast payment systems. Anton, I would like now to turn to you. And based on the introductory remarks, I think we need to make sure that with the introduction of a CBDC, we don't create unintended consequences, such as the exclusion of certain segments of the society. So how do you think central banks can promote best financial and digital literacy?
Thank you for the question. Well, I think I'll start with the point on trust that I made previously, and a key enabler of trust in a CBDC is accessibility. Something you need to think about really hard when you design a platform. And there are multiple aspects that could affect, in the design, that could affect accessibility of a CBDC, starting with a simple interface, which is rather straightforward. Other aspects include enabling a CBDC to be used not just on smartphones, but on so-called dumb phones, and maybe using USSD codes, which will allow you to cover a greater amount of the population, potentially at the cost of some technical possibilities that are enabled by smartphones. So you need to decide whether to go that extra mile to cover as much of the population, or stick to the devices that allow advanced cryptography and biometrics. A lot has been said about offline capabilities. That is a particular issue with geographically remote areas. And well, I don't think there is, or there has been, a very sufficiently strong case for an offline capability that is bulletproof. That I think that there are a lot of projects being developed right now as we speak, but the biggest challenge is, of course, to prevent double spending. And there's a lot of risk associated with that, plus a problem with the offline capability is that it may be sometimes at odds with another design feature that is allowing to recover lost balances on lost devices. Whether that is enabled, or whether a lost device means a lost balance, a balance that is lost forever. Programmability could be an enabler and could have unintended consequences that you mentioned. I think well, programmability could come in different shapes. For example, it could be a restriction on when you need to spend the balance. So it could be time-limited disbursement that cannot be stockpiled. It needs to be spent somewhere, or no, within a specific provider, or within a certain amount of time. But these features are, I think, particularly challenging, especially for the elderly, who could be used to simple-to-use cash, which doesn't really have those kinds of limitations. And to have a CBDC with all those potential conditions attached to it, that could be a challenge, could lead to unintended consequences, I think. So biometric identity could be an enabler to get rid of some of the identification issues, but that really relies on the technical, the thing I mentioned. You know, you need to have either some kind of national database or some other form of digital ID enabler first to operate in order to rely on that, to piggyback on that. And of course, CBDCs will not magically resolve the problem of insufficient technical or financial literacy. And as a sort of a second angle, I'll be quick on that, to this discussion is, so I was talking about the trust, right? The second part, the second enabler that could lead to unintended consequences is the buy-in from the industry. You know, we talk a lot about how a CBDC should not interfere with the banks or payment services providers, but then really comes the question of what's the incentive? What's the incentive for the industry to come in? And that really brings us to the question of pricing. And then an unintended consequence could be if the CBDC is designed in a way that really is expensive, that really hits the most excluded parts of the population hardest. And then they think that the key question to ask, what's the key objective? Is it a government-driven, a central bank-driven initiative that focuses on inclusion, or is it something that really tries to promote the business interest? And where's the real balance? But a lot can go wrong there.
So you mentioned digital ID. Can I ask you a quick question, and I need a quick answer? Do you think a CBDC can enhance financial inclusion without a digital ID?
Given the current level of technology, I strongly doubt that.
Thank you. So, Masaki, I would like to turn now to you because Anton mentioned the double spending problem and some trade-off that could appear between security and offline payments. And you highlighted before several design choices that the CBDC could have. So I would like to ask you what trade-offs do you think central banks would need to face when choosing certain design options?
Okay, yeah. Actually, there are a number of trade-offs between the required features of CBDC. And among others, I would like to highlight a couple of key trade-offs. First, security, the number of trade-offs with other requirements. Security measures protecting the CBDC core system could have negative impact on performance. Interfaces open for diverse external systems, which is critical for ensuring interoperability, would pose additional security challenges. Requiring a highly secured authorization process for end users while providing a good customer experience is also challenging. Having said that, I think sufficient level of security is essential for the confidence of CBDC as well as for the central bank. Therefore, we should not compromise it. In addition, security threats will evolve over time. Therefore, persistent efforts will be needed for specifying new security threats, implementing measures to address each of these threats, and updating such measures. Secondly, while CBDC's compatibility with other forms of money is critical to ensure its horizontal coexistence, excessive flow of funds from bank deposits to CBDC could create risks to the financial stability and the credit creation. While some recent studies suggest that such impacts might be manageable, there remain uncertainties, in particular at the initial stage of CBDC introduction. Given these points in mind, in the phase 2 of the proof of concept of our CBDC studies, which we started in this April, we'll evaluate some technical feasibility of possible safeguards to mitigate the impact to the financial system. Such safeguards to be evaluated will include caps for CBDC holdings and caps for CBDC transactions and remunerations that are not favorable for CBDC holders. And thirdly, we should strike a right balance between privacy and AML safety compliance. Privacy is one of the fundamental rights of human beings. It should be protected to achieve its sufficient adoption. At the same time, CBDC should not be misused for illicit finances, as other panelists have already mentioned. In this respect, a number of principles such as purpose limitation, access limitation, debt minimization, and user control should be incorporated well in CBDC design. Thank you.
Thank you, Masaki. So it looks like central banks have a lot of work to do to choose between these options. Suvendo, I would like to turn to you. You mentioned in your introductory remarks one of the key design considerations or the distribution models. So in your view, what is the ideal business model between public and private sector in order to make sure that the CBDC can be issued and distributed efficiently to underserved people?
Yeah, thank you for that question. As I said, for a vast country with geographical spread, it is very difficult for central bank to manage the distribution on its own. And traditionally, banks over a period of time, they have built the relationship with the customers over a period of time, and they are in a better position also to comply with the KYC AML requirements, ascertaining the identity and all those aspects. So in terms of distribution, it would be definitely, in my view, most of the countries would be looking at a distribution in a two-tier model and an indirect model where central bank role is kind of limited to the minting of CBDCs as well as issuance of CBDCs through the other institutions like the commercial banks or other approved institutions. So it would be in order to leverage on the spread, the reach, and the capabilities that the banks possess with regard to their onboarding of customers to for distributing the CBDCs as well. And private sector and the central banks should work in tandem. One thing I would like to point out is CBDC being a new concept, it offers a lot for innovation. Like in India, when we started with the UPI journey, the kind of innovations were never anticipated at that initial phase. So CBDC, once it is introduced with tokenization, programmability, interoperability, look at the cross-border payments, it offers a lot of possibilities. It is endless at this point in time. So definitely there is a case for the private sectors to come and innovate on top of the CBDC and also facilitate integration with the other payment ecosystem which are in place. So both, the private players and the central banks, there is a need to collaborate, cooperate, and which would be, for the benefit of the entire ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you, Suvendo. And let me stop here for a moment and see if there are any questions from the audience. I see one there.
Hello. Hi, moderator and gentlemen. Thank you. My name Teguh Harmanda from Toko Crypto. Yeah, finally we discussed more detail and deep about the CBDC in Indonesia. I mean, we start discussing over than 5 years ago. But if we look at the current biggest issue of the society that you mentioned just now, is about the trust. So I can say is the trust is the most value of currency. I mean, we don't care about the currency, whatever currency, but then trust is the most value currency right now. So my question is how we can ensure that CBDC system that we just discussed right now can increase the trust of the society more significantly. I mean, this is something that we need to consider. We're not thinking about the wholesale or retail or whatever, but then how, I mean, especially Indonesia society can believe, right? And then we have a more trust with the centralized system, and then we can use a CBDC and our instrument financial. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe Anton, you were the first one mentioning trust
Yes,
today.
yeah. Basically, I deliver this question for Anton and Masuki. Thank you, Mr.
Please.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm glad that that appeared to be a valid point. I wish there was a simple answer to promoting trust because of the fact that users can be irrational. That means that it takes a lot of time to form the trust. And we have seen examples of payment initiatives that have been developed by central banks around the world that flopped because consumers did not use those payment instruments, such as some of the electronic money platforms were actually supported directly by the government, but they were not used because people didn't trust the organization behind it. Some central banks are actually serial defaulters. Well, that's of course a very rare situation, but in the majority of cases, central bank will be the source of trust. And so it is important to make it clear that a CBDC as direct liability of a central bank, which is a source of ultimate security. It's probably the best type of security you can achieve within the national payment system, and as opposed to synthetic CBDC, so to say. At the same time, we have this discussion about trust, which makes a lot of sense if you have a lot of different other options within the economy. So you have to choose from. You can choose from. Usually you have a lot of private sector payment service providers, and then you have a central bank come in with a CBDC of its own, offering the ultimate way of storing value. That is one sort of discussion. But we're now talking about in financial inclusion type of situation where sometimes the real source of demand for a CBDC is not really coming from within the country. So I'm talking right now about some of the Pacific Island countries where the commercial banks don't really tread or are exiting because of the de-risking that's going on. So there is not enough supply to offer these kinds of services within the economy, just for the CBDC to offer something genuinely innovative. It could be just the only option for a country to maintain cross-border, to be a part of international financial system, because without relying on correspondent relationships, because commercial banks are exiting those countries, and a CBDC can be an enabler, could build that trust because it will connect the economy and consumers within the economy to the rest of the world. That could be a very powerful enabler of the trust, so that domestically as an ultimate source of security, and also internationally as something that gets rid of the high complexity, cost, and slow speed to enable cross-border payments without relying on correspondent bank accounts. But again, as I said, you can have a really powerful system which is accessible. And accessibility, all those technical aspects, they all enable trust. But it just takes a lot of time to build it. But the starting point, I think, is to build a strong, safe CBDC in the first place that can be relied on. And everything else, accessibility, just can come after that.
Thank you so much. Suvento, I have a question from you, from our online audience. Someone is asking, how should CBDCs be designed to minimize the barriers to its usage, such as technical literacy, access to mobile data networks for disabilities and elders? So maybe coming back to our question and discussion about unintended consequences of financial exclusion.
Yeah, if you allow me, can I contribute to this previous question
Sure,
with regard to trust? Yeah, let me try to give my 3 points on that. One is that the central banks traditionally enjoy a lot of trust and public confidence. And one of the ways that can be ensured in the rollout of CBDCs is to have a robust communication strategy while rolling it out, while launching the CBDCs. It should be communicated to the larger public in a very, very simple, understandable manner, the features of the CBDC, the way the anonymity or the data privacy is going to be handled, and also to make, as Anton said, it has to be a very, very safe and robust system. So how the cyber risk or the security risks are getting managed, a little bit of communication on these aspects would possibly, to my mind, generate a lot of trust. Second point would be with regard to the public are currently in all the countries are used to the physical cash. So in the wallet design itself, if the sum of the existing features of those form factor of the cash can be built in, it would instantly evoke some element of trust. If they are familiar to seeing those form physical cash, and in the design wallets itself, they can see that central bank, the liability to pay, the promise to pay, and the logo and all that. If those form factors can be sort of physically built into the mobile wallets, that would also entail some element of trust. And third point would be with regard to the making a very resilient and robust and security proof CBDC, which is definitely would be there on top of the mind of all central banks because of the reputational risk attached. And coming to the second question with regard to how underserved or, people with not having so many privileges or disabilities can use CBDCs. These are, although difficult to handle currently, but possibly with the, innovations taking place, we could be in a position to solve some of such use cases through, hardware kind of a development on the some kind of a card or feature phone related applications or use of sound as a technology, uh, which people, with disabilities to read and write. Probably the use of sound as a technology, those kind of features could be explored. And I'm sure in today's world, there is no dearth of technology and there is no dearth of, people to innovate. So some such use cases definitely can be solved. But yes, as on date, some of these remains a challenge.
Thank you, Suvendo. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, but it has been a great pleasure to share this conversation with you. Thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you to the audience for listening to us. And please join me in thanking the panelists. And now I hand over to Wehyu.
Thank you, Ms. Kadru Chabor, for moderating the second casual talk for today. Thank you. You can return to your seat. Thank you. Right, ladies and gentlemen, before we jump into our last session for today's event, we will invite to you, ladies and gentlemen, for some intermezzo. Music by Institut Seni Indonesia Denpasar.
Cinta-cinta Indonesia, negeri bagaikan permata, bersara bermandi cahaya, gemilang oh tanah air betana elok rupawan. Inilah senang pujaan, cinta-cinta cinta Indonesia. Lautan membiru terbentang, di langit bertaburan bintang benderang, oh ibu pertiwi kunan elok rupawan. Inilah lagu persembahan. Tuhan, ku dengar bisikmu di kesyahduan suara seruling, kala malam yang hening menggugah jiwaku, menyadarkanku senantiasa setia mengabdi berbakti. Dan aku pun berseru, cinta, cinta, cinta Indonesia. Padamu betakan bersatu, padamu betakan sedia, membela oh tanah tumpah darah nan suci mulia. Inilah janjiku padamu, ya Tuhan, ku dengar bisikku di kesyahduan suara seruling, kala malam yang hening menggugah jiwaku, menyadarkanku senantiasa setia mengabdi berbakti. Dan aku pun berseru, cinta Indonesia, cinta, cinta, cinta Indonesia, cinta, cinta, cinta Indonesia. Cinta Indonesia.
Let's give it a pause once again for Institut Seni Indonesia Denpasar. Right, ladies and gentlemen, now we have finally reached the last agenda for today. We would like to introduce you Mr. Karim Indra Gupta Siregar, the President Director of Bank Jago, who joined us online to give the testimonial regarding the digital currency. Mr. Karim. Right, we still have to wait. Mr. Karim Indra Gupta Siregar. Good morning, Mr. Karim. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Actually, it's good afternoon. Thank you, for the introduction. Good afternoon, yang terhormat Ibu Filianingsih Hendata, Kepala Departemen Kebijakan Sistem Pembayaran Bank Indonesia, distinguished guests, speakers, and panelists. My name is Karim Siregar. I'm the CEO of Bank Jago Indonesia. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak today at this honorable event. I'll try to share the view from the industry, but before I start with that, allow me to share a brief introduction of Bank Jago. Bank Jago is a tech-based full digital bank. We have aspirations to enhance the growth of millions through providing life-centric digital financial solutions by partnering with and being embedded with digital ecosystems, as we are firmly believer that the digital ecosystem is the way forward of digital, specifically here in Indonesia. And next, please. Yeah, so Bank Jago provides banking products and services, both conventional and through Sharia means. We serving individuals and micro, small, and medium enterprises in the Indonesian retail consumer and mass market segment. We currently have millions of customers, and we partner with tens of digital ecosystems. And our spirit of inclusion drives us to keep on innovating and continue collaborating with digital ecosystem players. Because unlike conventional banks, we do not have any branches, and therefore the way we provide our presence to our customers is through really working together with digital ecosystem players. The payment landscape in Indonesia has changed a lot, definitely over the years, and people have shifted to use and actually really adopted various kinds and means of electronic money for payments and purchases. It has been quite high, the adoption, specifically electronic money for payments through the private providers in the private sector, of which Bank Jago is also working together with one of the largest ecosystem of electronic money. A central bank digital money, CBDC, if it is being provided by the Bank of Indonesia, obviously is a legal tender in an electronic form of central bank money. And this clearly could be more widely used and accepted because it is provided from the central bank. And I do believe there has discussion related to trust. Since it is equal to actual cash, I do believe that the trust should be high for the CBDC itself, because it can support a resilient, innovative, clearly efficient, and competitive payment landscape here. Now, Bank Jago, we as digital banks are very well positioned, play an important role as a financial intermediary of CBDC, as we can help promote the usage of CBDC Our customers who are in the digital ecosystems have very high tech savviness and clearly also very high digital literacy. And they're really used to already in using all these digital instruments for payments. Yeah. And since Jago is connected and embedded in the digital ecosystems, increasing our collaboration with digital ecosystems, we do believe will also increase the usage of a CDBC. As I mentioned, as now we are already working together with one of the largest e-commerce platforms in Indonesia. And if we are able to introduce a CBDC through that, through the introduction of a digital ecosystem, I'm very confident that the adoption of a CBDC will also verify. And we can also increase the interoperability and the capability of a CBDC for specific purposes, since at the time we have, in our app, we have a function that we call the pocket capability, where this can then be used for specific digital currency purposes, including, let's say, distribution of government subsidies, programmable purchase, etc. In summary, the wave of digital transformation in financial service industry is definitely inevitable. We can see it with the high adoption of digital in Indonesia, also helped by COVID in a sense. And this definitely includes the payment landscape. We, as banking and as Bank Jago, we need to embrace and take advantage of this digital transformation to enhance the growth of millions, since the reach to digital is clearly more faster and efficient. Being a digital bank, Bank Jago, by design, we are essentially already cashless since our inception, and therefore strongly believe that a CBDC will be beneficial for the economy, as we are ready to support the creation of CBDC and committed to contribute in the adoption of the CBDC. CBDC will enable wider reach of financial services with greater efficiency, and therefore is a very positive advancement for the economy going forward. That would be my view, and particularly specifically also the view of Bank Jago as a digital bank of the introduction of a CBDC. We are very confident that if it is being introduced and when we introduce, we will definitely support it and continue to help of the central bank. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Mr. Karim for a review and testimonial regarding the digital currency on this financial and economics digital era. We have another review from Mr. Andri Asmoro, the Chief Economist of Bank Mandiri, to give his view for the digital currency. Good morning, Mr. Andri.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Yang terhormat Ibu Filianingsih, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. My name is Andri Asmoro, the Chief Economist of Bank Mandiri. First of all, thank you for inviting Bank Mandiri to share our thoughts on the CBDC. And we are looking forward to this great initiative. Rising to more than 105 countries, including Indonesia, CBDC implementation has been a compelling initiative that will be a significant game changer. We believe CBDC could deliver both better monitoring and visibility of the economic activities in the country, as well as the bank's potential opportunities that will be emerged in a cashless CBDC ecosystem, up to the possibility to support cross-border payment in the future. CBDC will improve transaction to be faster, cheaper, and more secure for all parties. It also gives the opportunities for households and businesses to have better access of digital money, as well as the complement of current forms of money and financial services. In countries that have successfully created a retail CBDC, consumers could get direct access to central bank funds, even for unbanked population. In line with the development and the massive usage of blockchain and distributed ledger technology in the financial sectors, the development of CBDC could boost the interlinked cross-border in the payment system with a more efficient and effective. The ability to support the direct access to the central bank funds for the unbanked population could widen the financial inclusion that has become one of the major challenges in this country in many years. The aim is clear, that better financial inclusion could bring an inclusive growth and narrowing the gap among regions in Indonesia. CBDC will also reduce the risk of the consumers' money with the commercial bank that could potentially collapse. Since all the CBDC transactions have been recorded on digital ledger, as we know, the money's cash flow will be much easier to be tracked. It will provide authorities to better detect fraud and other illicit activities. However, we have to require intensive attention for addressing major challenges such as privacy and data protection, as well as CBDC positioning between countries' fiat currency, whether it will coexist or not. Another attention should also be directed to a continuous communication to the financial sector's players related to the strategy, coverage, and the timeline in CBDC implementation. For example, looking at from other countries' experience, for example, China, that has spent around 6 to 7 years from concept to the piloting, the communication is an important and strategic move to overcome the early challenges. Communication is also important to gain support and level of trust from actors in the financial sector. The central bank and CBDC need to collaborate with financial institutions by involving them in the system. For example, BI can adopt two-tier system in which CBDC. First, the central bank creates the digital version of its currency. Second, commercial banks and other financial institutions distribute digital currency, the digital currency. The maintenance of the CBDC wallets can be given to commercial banks as well. On the other area, there are a lot of potential for CBDC in wholesale market to improve interbank activities and others, particularly in cross-border payments. With some opportunities and challenges ahead, we are excited to support the central bank digital currency implementation by joining forces and finalizing the framework through the working group. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Mr. Andri, for your testimonial regarding the digital currency on this financial and economics digital era. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we finally reach all of our agenda on today's casual talk. If I may conclude, there are three main ideas about digital currency to focus on. The first one, common regulatory framework and oversight on crypto assets. There is a need for international coordination and collaboration to close regulatory gaps and prevent potential regulatory arbitrage. The second one, urgency of exploring CBDC. CBDC occurs as prospective solution for the central banks to answer the challenges and seize the opportunities of digitalization. And the third one, or the last one, wider access and financial inclusion. CBDC need to be equipped with key design features which ensure wider financial inclusion as part of its value proposition. Finally, I believe that the key to further address those three main ideas is by maintaining a great synergy among regulators and also the industries. So once again, let's give a round of applause for FECD 2022 for making the good collaboration and synergy between ministries and institutions, as well as associations and all industry players. At last, we would like also to thank Deputy Governor of Bank Indonesia, Bapak Doni Primanto Juwono, and also all speakers and moderators, and also our distinguished guests for participating in the second day of FECD 2022 Digital Currency Session. And we remind you as well that FECD 2022 event series held for 5 days. So you can also follow all the activities on the mini stage and showcase, also on the same place, on the same building at the Westin Hotel Resort in Nusa Dua to get the new experience and journey for economic progress in Indonesia. On behalf of Bank Indonesia and all committee of Indonesia Financial Economic Festival 2022, I'm Wahyu Wibowo signing off. Stay safe and stay healthy, and please welcome Institut Seni Indonesia Denpasar. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti Om.
Jani bawa enggong mawang jelas yang jantung pada girangnya bercanda. Wentan urun jani bawa enggong ya enggong rita hujan balas yang jantung pada girangnya bercanda. Kami menanggulang yang mengangkat langit burung jadi maawa anggong kulitnya kes hilcar aspal. Rojani sesir kedaya gajah sate gede tidak bencana buron gede aneka binawan ana ure babanile alasaning cora pele. Ana ure babanile alasaning cora pale.
Jublah suweng, suweng iten ngelenter, mambukan tunggul gudel. Empong larak leret, sopo guyun dele ake sir, sir pong dele kopong sir, sir pong dele kopong. Jublah suweng, suweng iten ngelenter, mambukan tunggul gudel. Empong larak leret, sopo guyun dele ake sir, sir pong dele kopong sir, sir pong dele kopong.
Dolanan ing jopo padang ular padange koyo rino remulane
sing awe-awe geningake hojo turu sore-sore.
yo prakonco dolanan ing jopo padang ular padange koyo rino remulane sing awe-awe kelingake ojo
Turu sore-sore.
Jaranan jarane jaran teji jaranan jarane jaran teji
Sing numpak loro behi, sing ngiring para menteri. Cek cek nong jaranan. Jaranan jarane jaran teji jaranan jarane jaran teji sing numpak loro behi sing ngiring para menteri. Cek cek nong jaranan turun jaranan jarane jaran teji jaranan jarane jaran teji sing numpak loro behi sing ngiring para menteri. Cek cek nong jaranan turun.
Baik, Bapak Ibu hadirin sekalian, kami informasikan telah ditemukan token BCA. Sekali lagi kami informasikan telah ditemukan sebuah token BCA. Jadi bagi Bapak Ibu yang merasa kehilangan